Okay, and I'm also going to try out this. I know some of you are on the phone, so you won't be able to see this, but I've got this. I'm going to switch my screen here and make this as big as I can.
I
So
can see it
we're on session 3. You can see it, Farrellyn?
on the phone, but I can see it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know if this will be useful or not. We're on session 3, and the reason I wanted to just look at this is this. I just want to quickly read through. This is basically the synopsis of session 3. So it goes over the mechanics of contact and further attunement of the proper configurations for effective channeled workings. And then we get into the construction and use and history of the Great Pyramids. Talk a little bit about the pyramid capstones, the original capstone, and then the substitute, the chimney effect of the capstone, how the blocks were moved. And that's very interesting. It was co-created with the intelligent energy within the living rock. We talk about the role and nature of faith in the context of creating the pyramids. And then the distinction between individual versus group creative power. And the pyramids were thought / built by Ra's social memory complex, which is a profound, profound thing. The Great Pyramid was built with everlasting rock. So we'll get into what is that. And then the others after the Great Pyramid were built by moving the stone. And about everlasting rock, thought forms versus created material. And why the pyramids were made of many blocks. And the pyramids were centers of initiation and healing. We talk about that a little bit, get a brief intro into the pyramid's shape and its purpose. And then the session closes up with contact maintenance, as it usually does. So yeah, I just want to throw those, just give a kind of quick, brief overview of what's in the session to come. Because I know sometimes we may not make it through all the readings. So I just want to at least have that synopsis in there so we know what we're covering. So that's what we're going to go through. I will just take a moment to invoke some support for our study today. I invite all those benevolent beings who are aware of our study, all those Confederation members and all those guides and allies and teachers who serve the one infinite creator through the ways of love to be with us and support this study, that it may help us on our evolutionary journeys. And to the degree that we are benefited from this study, we may radiate that benefit out into the world to those around us. So may it be. Thank you. Okay, let's get into it. So if anybody has the material pulled up who wants to start reading, we're going to start with 3.0. Would anybody like to read?
I can read. Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. All right, January 21st, 1981. And let me know if this gets garbled anyway, please. Thank you. Ra, I'm Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the one infinite creator. I communicate with you. Questioner. My first question is, did we correctly perform the ritual for starting the communication?
Excuse me. I'm hearing feedback. Does someone have their mic on?
Oh, yeah, I do. I'll shut it off.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that better now? Okay. Okay, great. I am Ra. The placement of the artifacts designed to balance the instrument should be placed at the instrument's head for the least distortion of effect. The remainder of the beginning account of purpose is quite acceptable for those speaking desire to serve. Otherwise, the attendant emphasis in mind complexities would not have been affected properly. We caution you to guard against those who are not wishing to serve others above all else from taking part in the beginning or in lending their distortions of mind, body, spirit complex to any session, as we should then be unable to properly blend our distortions with those of this instrument. Questioner, should I move the Bible, candle, and incense at this time? I am Ra. This would be appropriate. Questioner, after moving the items, is this the proper position? I am Ra. Please correct the angle of the incense so that it is perpendicular to the plane of 20 degrees north by northeast. Questioner, after making the correction, is this satisfactory? Ra. Please check your eye to make fine correction. We will explain the process by which this becomes a significant distortion balancer. The incense acts as energizer to the physical body of this instrument, signifying its humanity. This is therefore a necessity that the wafted smoke is perceived from the same relative angle as the instrument perceives the open Bible balanced by the lighted candle, signify love, light, and light, love, and therefore give the mental and emotional, shall we call it, distortion complex of this instrument the sight of paradise and peace which it seeks. Thus, energized from the lower to the higher, the instrument becomes balanced and does not grow fatigued. We appreciate your concern, for this will enable our teach learning to proceed more easily. Questioner, does it appear correctly aligned now? Ra, I judge it within limits of acceptability. Questioner, at the last session, we had 2 questions.
Actually, why don't you pause there?
Okay.
Pause there. Yeah, thank you, Kristen. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I just want to review this kind of like setup stuff, because in some ways it seems like maybe it's less important, and I think, you know, it's certainly not as significant as the philosophy, but I do think there are some things to take away from the contact maintenance and the way that they set up the working. And I want to mention, if you read some of the introductory material that LL put out, you learn that in the first few sessions, they were actually including some other folks besides just the 3. It was more than just Jim and Don and Carla. There was Leonard and I think a person or 2. And in the beginning, I think they were considering, you know, having a larger group. And in the very first session, I think if you all remember, they ask about, well, first Ra tries to come through any of the other instruments besides Carla, and that was not successful. And then Don asks specifically about some of the other people that he thought might be appropriate to join the sessions to join. And Ra commented that Ra wasn't opposed to it as long as there was harmony between the entities coming. And then after just the first, I don't know how many it was, if it was just 3 or 4, then it was just the 3 of them for the rest of the time. But in the first few sessions, there was actually other people coming, my understanding. Yeah, so Ra comments on that. And then there's the alignment of the supportive, what do they call them? The appurtenances, maybe. And Nia, wasn't it you that didn't you express that you had some, it made you feel a little funny? I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I just want to make space for I think you're not the only if I'm remembering correctly, you're not the only person that has this question of like, wait, the Bible, incense, what's that all about?
I came to some terms with that. What felt comfortable for me was that I realized personally, I think it's less about what the objects are themselves and more about how they make the entity feel and what that drums up within the entity. So, you know, for me, holding a stick, a feather, and some crystals is way more appropriate than the things that they have chosen. But again, I became somewhat acceptance with it from the idea that it's what makes them, it brings up the love light within them for whatever reason. So that's what's appropriate for them, and that's what is allowing that to come through. So if it were me in the room, it would have been other things on the table, and I could have pulled up the same love light and have been able to be in frequency for that. It's like, to this day, I can smell sage burning and I'm instantly in that space. I'm already shifted. It doesn't even matter, you know, I could put on a certain necklace or other adornment and that pulls that up for me. So
yeah, that's so well said. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I apologize, I didn't mean to put you on the spot or anything, but I really appreciated the point you had brought up earlier. And I think it's something that it has come up before for me in talking to other people about this material. So I just thought it'd be nice to to touch on that. And I love what you said about all that. And I don't know if there's anybody else that wants to make any comments or questions about any of that first material before we move on.
I'm curious if I think I've seen in the past some pictures and they were talking about like the angles of the objects from her head and stuff like that. Like, do they ever go into, like, I just find that curious too. Like they have to be within a certain place of her energy field or frequency.
Yeah, let me show you guys a picture.
Neil just showed it too.
Oh yeah, you pulled it up. There you go. That's great.
Let me get to it. Yeah. Yeah, so that's about like, I guess it has something to do with where in her energy field it
I remember
Um,
it said something about northeast was a particular direction that's pulling up a particular energy that helps enhance her channeling ability, something to that degree, but there wasn't a whole lot said about it in that session.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, Ra also talked about the whole setup of the room and Carla's, basically like alignment in the room was based on what they say is the direction of the in-streaming of the energies of the coming age or of the new age. And I don't exactly know what that means. It's been a mystery to me what that means, but yeah, the sort of like they talk about the shapes and geometries of consciousness, and I think that this is another application of that where on the earth there's an energy web that is invisible to us, but directionality has metaphysics connected to it. I mean, and I can't unpack that for y'all, but Ross said that there was that they're basically transmitting from a certain direction, and if they aligned Carla on the table with the appurtenances behind her directly, it would support the reception of their narrow band transmission. They're not an easy source to channel, and setting up the room in such a way would just aid that reception being more successful. And again, here's that image of Don being very, very fastidious in one of his measurements, looking at the alignments and the angle. Yeah, Neil.
I wonder, since Jim's still around, if we can maybe somehow submit a question about the 20 degrees northeast and see if he has any personal insights maybe on why that was the correct angle.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I haven't tested it, but I believe they just recently, LL just recently were able to integrate the entire library of channeled transcripts, not just the raw material, as searchable. Like it wasn't searchable before. And I think it's now searchable through the LL research website. So that could also be searched to see if there was any information about that.
Yeah, I saw that they have, channeling starting in 1972 and dove a little bit into those on what they're about. And it's Hatan and Latui kind of preparing Carla, Donna, and Jim for the raw contact, like that you guys need to meditate daily. You need to do this, like kind of preparing them, knowing that raw is going to come soon. And I found that pretty interesting. So might be a little task to read those pre-raw contact channelings.
I had the same experience. I read some of the Confederation channelings that took place before Ra, and I was sort of I'd already been reading Ra for a long time, but I was surprised to see how much of the vocabulary and the concepts that get talked about with Ra were already seeded. Like some of the sort of very obscure concepts, they had already kind of been introduced to through the channeling with Quo and not with Quo, but with the entities that make up Quo, Hatan and Latwii and some of the other Confederation members. It's fascinating. Yeah, I definitely recommend people, at least kind of check out some of that material. It's really, really, it's really interesting.
Hey, Aaron.
Yeah.
Would you mind, yesterday you gave a really good explanation of Quo and the three entities that are Quo. And so that it's been brought up and you have a really excellent baseline description for that. Would you mind sharing that information right now?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. Quo call themselves a principle, and it's essentially a conglomeration of three social memory complexes that are harmonized enough that they can speak as one. And it's made up of Ra, who's coming from the sixth density, Hatan. I sometimes feel like I maybe might get these confused. I don't remember if Hatan or Latwii, which is from fourth and which is from fifth. I think I remembered it yesterday. Does anybody know?
Latwii is fifth and Hatan is fourth.
Yeah, great. So it's this blended group that represents 4, 5, and 6. And it came up yesterday in the context of a lot of people find it easier to read Quo. And it makes a lot of sense because they're transmitting from a much closer, space in consciousness to third density. So it's not quite such a huge leap. A lot of people find it easier to read Quo than they do to read Ra. Cool. Okay, let's continue. So we're at 3.6. Does anybody want to read? Great. Amanda?
Questioner. At the last session, we had 2 questions we were saving for this session. One having to do with the possible capstone of the Great Pyramid at Giza, the other with how you moved the heavy blocks. I know these questions are of no importance at all with respect to the law of one, but it was my judgment, which you may correct, that this would provide an easy entry for the reader of the material. We are very grateful for your contact and would certainly take suggestions about how we should proceed with this. This is just one guess. Ra. I am Ra. I will not suggest the proper series of questions. This is your prerogative as free agent of the law of one, having understood that our social memory complex cannot effectually discern the distortions of the societal mind-body-spirit complex of your peoples. We wish now to fulfill our teach, learning, honor responsibility by answering what is asked. This only will suffice, for we cannot plumb the depths of the distortion complexes which infect your peoples. The first question, therefore, is the capstone. We iterate the unimportance of this type of data. The so-called Great Pyramid had 2 capstones. One was of our design, and it was of smaller and carefully contrived pieces of the material upon your planet, which you call granite. This was contrived for crystalline properties and for the proper flow of your atmosphere via a type of what you would call chimney. At a time when we as a people had left your density, the original was taken away and a more precious one substituted. It consisted in part of a golden material. This did not change the properties of the pyramid, as you call it, at all, and was a distortion due to the desire of a few to mandate the use of the structure as a royal place only. Do you wish to query further upon this first question? Questioner. What did you mean by chimney? What was its specific purpose? Ra. There is a proper flow of your atmosphere which, though small, freshens the whole of the structure. This was designed by having airflow ducts, as this instrument might call them, situated so that there was a freshness of atmosphere without any disturbance or draft. Questioner.
Actually,
How were
let's
the
pause
blocks
there.
formed?
Let's pause there,
Okay.
Amanda. Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
I think there's a few things in here that are pretty important to understand. So, but I'll just open the floor. Does anyone have want to make any comments on any of that or have any questions? Yeah, Kristen.
I was a little, this is one of those very small instances where the communication from Ra and the one sentence about plumbing the depths of the distortions that infect your peoples. It's like one of those almost judgy type of statements that seems to come through. And there's not many, but it does happen sometimes. And I kind of wonder if there was like some sort of translation error on their part. And then it got me wondering, like, is the veil a sort of like psychic infection? I don't know. Maybe it is, but that seems like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, so I appreciate what you're saying. And I wonder, what do you all think? Is by Ra saying we cannot plumb the depths of the distortion complexes which are infect your peoples, is that a judgment? Does that seem like a judgment?
I didn't think so at first. But I wondered if it was a case of free will, like imposing on free will.
How so? What do you mean by that, Scott?
Right, I'm thinking.
Oh, gotcha.
That, if they were plumbing the depths of that, they may be doing the work for us, that we're supposed to do the work ourselves, or that it's a little bit of a slippery slope. I don't know. I don't know exactly. It was just some thoughts that came to mind.
Yeah, Neil.
I agree with that as well. When they talk about how they don't want to make the same mistakes as when they appeared in physical form. So when they say that we cannot plumb the depths, they're really, actually meaning that we cannot do that because it will depolarize us or, release too much that we can't give to you right now.
Yeah, totally. I agree. In a way, they might even be judging themselves. Like they had the thought they would come to Earth before they came. They had the thought they'd come to Earth. They brought it to the Council of Saturn. It was approved. They came, they walked among the people, and they just had no idea that the information of the law of one could even possibly be used in as a distorted a fashion as Earthlings did. They just didn't anticipate it. And had they anticipated it, they wouldn't have done it. So in a way, it's like maybe they're judging them, not judge, but I think they're self-aware that they have to be very careful in navigating the free will of the communication that's happening, because they just know about themselves that they can't see things from the perspective of the distorted view that most of the 3D mind of Earth has. So yeah.
I think it's the word infect. It's not that aspect of like not being able to plumb the depths or not being willing to. It's the word infect that infect your people. That's the thing that's why I was wondering, is it a translation error, or is the veil a type of infection, which it doesn't seem. I don't know. I just don't get the sense that the veil is an infection. It just seems like a mechanical aspect of the density changes.
Well, I don't take it as them talking about the veil. specifically, they're talking about the distortion complexes of the mass mind of Earth, not necessarily the veil.
Somebody
Scott.
has their mic on again when you're talking. Thank you. Feedback.
That's you, Scott.
Yeah, I had my hand up. I was muting myself while I was talking. Okay, my thought on that query was that their evolutionary process was very different from ours, right? Their movement through third density was pretty quick and much more harmonious. And so I think it might just be a kind of observation that and looking at us in our evolutionary journey with how much aggression we have, all these things, it's like they see a virus, perhaps, that's very complex and maybe that's confusing to them, or they just didn't have that experience in their evolutionary process.
Nia?
I had one more thing to say about that. I think the word isn't meant to sound so offensive as much as possibly just their perspective of that we're dealing with. It could have been different verbiage, it could have just, these are the distortions you're dealing with. But the thing that really stands out to me the most about all that is that it feels like to me they keep dropping these subtle hints that, back in the beginning where they were like, we teach one, we teach all. And, we got into a conversation around if that's just going into the collective Akashic records and therefore when we all tune in to the infinite wisdom, we can draw on that kind of thing. But there seems to be this subtlety sprinkled throughout that they have a responsibility, and just them, like, their mission wasn't complete because of how it got corrupted last time. So they're coming in and they're like, even if we only reach 5 people or just you 3 in the group, our mission is complete. Our responsibility has been taken care of. So therefore, this is in your hands. We've done our part for showing up. Now it's up to you to be specific in what you get out of it. If that makes sense. Like, there's just like this sprinkling of the verbiage of responsibility on their part to continue showing up, but they're not going to just hand us a book of the law of one and go, here you go, like they did last time, as if that were a mistake. So without them explaining that, it feels like there's something having to do with the first time they showed up, as well as, again, this is their responsibility, that energetically, karmically speaking, so to speak, that even if they just touch one person, they've fulfilled their mission and they're free of their karmic debt at that point that they may have incurred from last time having not gone so well and being corrupted. But I don't know that they explicitly state it that way. But
Well, that might be the case. I took it a little bit differently. I think that they have said that this working they did with LL doesn't necessarily change their strategy. They still plan to stay with the Earth Collective until they've completed the process of reducing the distortions that were caused by their initial contact with Earth. And they say, even if it doesn't happen in this round of third density, they'll stay with the Earth for another 75,000 years and continue to do the reparations work that they feel like is necessary to completely remove the distortions. So I'm pretty sure that they don't consider that this work kind of completes their karma. It seems like they have committed to staying with Earth until the entire ripples of what happened when they came to Egypt are kind of harmonized. That's my take. Yeah, Farrellyn?
Yeah, hi. Do they give a percentage of what they feel that distortion has been from their original attempts to educate?
Not that I know of.
Just curious.
Yeah, I don't think so.
just because Egypt has affected so much of the planet, you know, and our whole stories about this have gone on through the Roman Empire, through European culture, through American dollar bills, you know, that I just wonder what they feel their responsibility is. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah, me too. And I think we can all agree it's massive. I mean, the influence that the Egyptian civilization had on, you know, intervening civilizations were huge. And I also think that there are unseen influences that came through the sort of occult paths, both the positive and negative occult paths that came out of specifically out of the contact with Ra. I think there was a elite class, and if we fast forward in this, you know, in this what we're reading now, this capstone issue, you know, just to pull that in, the royal class removed Ra's capstone and put a gold capstone in its place as a symbolic act of basically saying, us only. They like, it was like off limits now. This is for royalty only. And of course, when Ra gave the technology, that was not their intention, as you know, as is pretty obvious. Yeah, and then you know, obviously that symbology of the capstone of the pyramid is very significant in our world today still. And the Illuminati, you know, references, which I actually personally believe probably has positive and negative implications. But basically, at its root, the Illuminati, the word, it means those who have special knowledge, those who've been illumined to special occult knowledge. And I think that there are both positive and negative groups who do have, you know, knowledge that could be construed as special or higher than the general population of Earth. And in some ways, the highest knowledge that can be considered is the law of one. You know, it's high sixth density teachings. So anyway, yeah, I think that the idea that their impact on the world is significant is kind of can't be overstated. Okay, so Fairlyn and Scott.
Sorry, I'll just put my hand down.
There's a book that I had years ago that William Henry wrote called The Illuminati, and it was not about the Illuminati that everybody talks about today. I haven't read it in over 10 years, so I can't remember a lot of the material, but it was interesting. Now that we're talking about it, like, oh, I want to read it again.
Yeah, and of course, you know, I'm sure all of you have intersected with conversations or talks or information about the Masonic Lodge and the Masons. And you know, from my experience, there's an incredibly mixed reaction in the general population as to what they're up to. What is that secret society about? It's an initiatory society. Well, were they up to helpful things or hurtful things? Like sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, they're Masons. It's you know, those are the bad guys." And sometimes you hear, you know, Rudolf Steiner talks about the Masonic Lodge and the Masons. So like, what's up with that? And anyway, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but the Masons, as far as I understand, you know, their root is about building in stone, which probably comes from the mystery of the Great Pyramid. I'm guessing. I don't know that for sure, but okay. So then there's the chimney effect. They describe that that the way they designed the pyramid overall, including the capstone, you know, they worked together to allow for a flow of air to pull just enough air through the spaces of the pyramid to keep the air fresh, but without making a breeze, without being distracting from the initiatory spaces. That's pretty interesting. Okay, how about we move on to 3.8. Anybody want to read?
I can read. All right. 3.8 questioner. How are the blocks moved? I am Ra. You must picture the activity within all that is created. The energy is, though finite, quite large compared to the understanding distortion of your peoples. This is an obvious point well known to your peoples, but little considered. This energy is intelligent. It is hierarchical. Much as your mind-body-spirit complex dwells within a hierarchy of vehicles and retains, therefore, the shell or shape or field, and the intelligence of each ascendingly intelligent or balanced body, so does each atom of such a material as rock. When one can speak to that intelligence, the finite energy of the physical or chemical rock/body is put into contact with that infinite power which is resident in the more well-tuned bodies, be they human or rock. With this connection made, a request may be given. The intelligence of infinite rockness communicates to its physical vehicle, and that splitting and moving, which is desired, is then carried out through the displacement of the energy field of rockness from finity to a dimension which we may conveniently call simply infinity. In this way, that which is required is accomplished due to the cooperation of the infinite understanding of the Creator indwelling in the living rock. This is, of course, the mechanism by which many things are accomplished, which are not subject to your present means of physical analysis of action at a distance. That's a lot.
Yep, that's a lot. Yeah, I'm so curious to hear from you all. What sense do you make of that?
It makes perfect sense. That's my short answer.
I can go. I think the understanding that the creator is just another, just first density, it's still the creator, and that understanding of the unity of everything, they can speak to that part of the creator and lovingly ask it to move to a new position. And just, I think the first block is that knowing that it is all connected at the heart.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way. It's a really good way of putting it.
But I think as third density mind, body, spirit complexes, it's probably beyond us. I'm like, we don't even have mystics throughout human history as we know it in general that, the next line, it says, it talks about the moving mountains if you have enough faith. I don't think our human bodies are capable of that level of faith. I mean, otherwise we probably would have heard about it. I mean, I haven't seen it. That's just, if that's capable of humans to do such, we're not there yet. I think we're wired, our very DNA may have that capability, but I don't think we're supported enough in that for that to be a possibility. Just in how we're raised, and instantly from birth and learning physics through action, we're limited in our ability to get there.
You go ahead, Scott, and then Yuri.
Yeah, first of all, it's fascinating and inspiring, that they can, I mean, it makes sense to me for sure. It's not within my ability. And when I first read this, I was like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. That answers the mystery of how the pyramids were, or at least the Great Pyramid, right? And I have heard of a few, I think there are exceptions. I think there are people who have been embodied ascended masters in different traditions. And there's a story that comes to mind. I forget where I heard it. It's fairly popular, or some not popular, but of a Tibetan Lama, and the student is walking with them along the mountains, and all of a sudden they're walking, and there's an avalanche that's coming down right at him, and he just does some gesture, says something, with his hands, and he's able to stop the avalanche, and then they pass through, and then he does this, and then the avalanche continues. And for all my understanding, it's a true story. And then in the stories of Tom Brown's Jr. with his teacher Stalking Wolf, who was a Apache, there's some really extraordinary things. And I went to the school there, and he's told stories about, like, and I've known him in person, and I don't think he's exaggerating, but he talks about this stuff, like Stalking Wolf is teaching Tom Brown about this same stuff. And he has a saying that, like, faith is the most powerful thing. And if you ever read his story about what happened to him when he was a young boy, it's extraordinary. I mean, it's so extraordinary. And one of the stories that Tom told in the class was they were walking along the side of the road, and all of a sudden he saw this scene unfolding where this child was riding a bicycle, and they're about to ride out into the road, and this big, huge truck was coming. And Stalking Wolf was able to, like, with the force, using the force energy, like, take that truck and, like, move that truck and then move it back onto the road. Like, he watched him do it. So couple of examples. Everybody can believe what you want to believe, but I imagine and I think that there have been some, they may have come back from 6th century to 5th century, remembered who they were, or so yeah, that's my thought about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yuri.
Yeah, I think Ra mentions many times in the book that humans are able to connect to intelligent infinity when they reach, like, last subdensity of the third density, or I don't know how it functions. But he gives us the information that we are able of going beyond what we see and develop the same ability of healing other people, which is very much to see with connecting to the infinite intelligence. So we have great opportunities, and Ra teaches us how we can do it and develop this connection by balancing centers and so on.
Yeah, great. It's a great reminder. Thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, it brought to mind for me people who practice, like, spoon bending with their minds, and how certain folks, if with enough practice, can actually shape reality with their minds. And that's what kind of came to mind when they were talking about connecting with the rocks. And so I was just thinking that in terms of like spoon bending, like someone were to bend a spoon with their mind, would they connect with, say, the energy of all of steel, like the energy of steel or the energy of silver, and then use that energy to create a bend in the spoon? Like, I'm just trying. The like, I have faith that it's possible. I know it's like, for me, that's like, oh yeah, totally, that could happen. But I'm also like, how what is the practical application and what can I do with that and what do I have to start with? You know, like yeah, how does that relate? Like what would if I wanted to do something like that, but like is it connecting with the like a particular like the particular atoms of like say of the rock or of the steel or something? So that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, those are really good questions, and I'm excited to. I think once we keep moving through the material, it'll bring up the more applicable lessons here. I don't think any of us are trying to build pyramids from stone, but yeah, the sort of the essence of it, I think, is relevant to our lives, and we'll get into that. Carolyn.
All right. Yeah, really quickly, I agree with you, Nia, that we are so programmed to think that we're not ready and we're not capable, blah, blah, blah. That's how programmable we are. That's how programmable we are, is that we collectively don't believe we can do it. We've been convinced that we are third dimensional limited beings. So that's my point there, is that from infancy, we are so programmable that our reality is shaped for us. And I am one of those people who feels like I'm going to get hurt if I fall off a 50-foot ladder. Yeah. And yet I know there are many, many examples. And the other thing is, third dimension density is all about practice. So the more we repeat, that's what echoes through. That's what makes a difference. And that's why you meditate regularly. That's why you change our beliefs consciously. It's rewiring and repatterning that really makes a difference in third density. So that's it.
Yeah, beautiful points. Yeah, Yuri.
Yeah, I have one more remark. Listening to the guy about archetypical mind, he's saying that there are three like levels, three distortions, which is free will. The first one, the second one is God or love, and the third one is energy, intelligent energy. And Rahi is saying here that the energy is intelligent and it is hierarchical. So maybe it means that those who are connected to the God are like they have a power to manipulate the energy. And then he explained how he can do it, how one can do it.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. I appreciate you bringing in those three distortions. I think that's really interesting. Because from that perspective of the 1, 2, 3, free will, and then love, and then light, well, love is synonymous with the logos. And yeah, so what you're saying makes me think of, if you can connect to that level, the creator level, the logos is what generates light. The logos is the source of light. And of course, light is the source of matter, including stone and spoons and all those things. So, and in a way, you could almost think of it as it's as simple as just going to the level before there's material. We're so convinced that the material universe is so fixed and so solid. But I think that when you contemplate the distortions and how the universe comes into form, and you realize that form is preceded by light, and light is preceded by the creator or creativity of the logos, and then that's preceded by the free will of the one infinite creator, that if you can just get back to that level of the true self, which we all are, then it does sort of like change the equation of what it would take to change matter. You just need to return to the truth. Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
Yuri, for bringing that up.
I agree.
Cool. I want to keep us moving through the materials. So we got 3.9. I'll go ahead and read this one. 3.9, questioner. I am reminded of the statement, approximately, if you had enough faith, You could say to a mountain to move and the mountain would move. I assume this is approximately what you are saying. And I am assuming that if you are fully aware of the law of one, then you are able to do these things. Is that correct? Ra. I am Ra. The vibratory distortion of sound, faith, is perhaps one of the stumbling blocks between those of what we may call the infinite path and those of the finite proving understanding. You are precisely correct in your understanding of the congruency of faith and intelligent infinity. However, one is a spiritual term, and the other, more acceptable perhaps, to the conceptual framework distortions of those who seek with measure and pen. 3.10, questioner. Then, if an individual is totally informed with respect to the law of one, and lives and is the law of one, such things as the building of a pyramid by direct mental effort would be commonplace. Is that what I am to understand? Am I correct? Ra. I am Ra. You're incorrect in that there is a distinction between the individual power through the law of one and the combined or societal memory complex, mind, body, spirit, understanding of the law of one. In the first case, only the one individual, purified of all flaws, mountain. In the case of mass understanding of unity, each individual may contain an acceptable amount of distortion, and yet the mass mind could move mountains. The progress is normally from the understanding which you now seek to a dimension of understanding which is governed by the laws of love and which seeks the laws of light. Those who are vibrating with the law of light seek the law of one. Those who vibrate with the law of one seek the law of foreverness. We cannot say what is beyond this disillusion of the unified self with all that there is, for we still seek to become all that there is, and still we are Ra. Thus, our paths go onward. So when they say law of light, of love, and law of foreverness, what are they referring to?
I kind of felt like they were referring to the laws of the universe. Free will, love, and light. But then I wasn't quite sure like how they were being compared like in this instance. And with foreverness, like I don't know, that's a new, is that the only time they mention law of foreverness? I think in all of the, no, it's not. Okay.
No, they're talking about the densities. The law of love, the laws of love are those entities which seek in fourth density. The laws of light are those entities who seek in fifth. The law of one is sixth, and the law of foreverness is seventh.
Right. Okay. That makes more sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, because the laws of the universe are just free will, love, and light. They're not called the law of free will, the law of love, the law of light.
Well, those are the first three distortions, which are somewhat, you know, they don't call them laws. Oh, they do say the law of free will. Anyway, language, limitations of language. Fairlyn, did you have your hand up for? Okay.
There was like one thing that they mentioned in one of the above passages where they described like learn, wait, what was it? Learn understood versus, what did they say here? I thought it was kind of a cool distinction. Proving understanding versus learn understood.
And what are they talking about? What is that distinction? Does anyone have a sense of it? You want to say, Scott?
Yeah, the distinction to me is that was kind of like we were talking about before about faith being a spiritual thing. right? It's, how can I explain it? It's like, we'll just use that word, but the other thing is like the other part of humanity more in the contemporary Western world, which is logic and reason, right? And these are functions of the mind, both different functions of the mind. Stalking Wolf does talk about that a lot too. I forget if I could remember some of the sayings. He would say like, modern man is hopelessly entrapped inside the prison of his own ego, and the logic and reason only can go so far. And he's all these sayings that are like pretty interesting. While he's like performing these miracles, you know. But anyways, that's my understanding of it. That this it's literally like two functions of not just the mind, because I think faith is more than just the mind, and maybe logic and reason and calculating and mathematics and all that is the logical, rational reasoning mind.
And it's referred to as finite proving understanding, which now that after hearing you talk, I think there's a limit to what we can know with certainty before things start crumbling. Like you start looking deeper and deeper down to the atomic level, and things start to behind that, they start to like get all ooh, I wasn't expecting that, you know. Things pop in and out of existence, you know. So
Yeah,
there's
that's
a
right.
finiteness to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think another way that you can think about this is Ra talks about the two interconnected aspects of intelligence. They talk about the intuitive faculty and the rational faculty. And I think that, you know, seeking the truth along the, you know, using more heavily the intuitive faculty is more of a religious, you know, or a spiritual or a faith-based approach to seeking the truth. And leaning more heavily into the rational intuitive, the rational faculties of intelligence is more of a scientific, you know, or rational approach. And they're both valid, but faith is more of a religious or spiritual term and concept. And intelligent infinity is more of a measurable, scientific, mathematical, physics-based saying of the same thing, which is interesting. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Can I chime in again?
Yep.
Yeah, this is a concept and a thought process and a conversation, and I've been fascinated about it for quite a few years. And sometimes oftentimes I look at it from the perspective of the difference between on Earth, indigenous knowledge, right? Like the knowledge and wisdom that the indigenous people carry, and then the approach from the Western modern side, right? And there's like one of my favorite books is a book called the Wisdom of the Elders by what's his name, Suzuki. There's two authors that wrote it, and they researched for 10 years. They went all around the world, but they're comparing all the development of biology, like what biology has taught us in recent decades, and then quantum physics, right? So it's almost like the two hemispheres or something of the brain, you know, are in the potentialism to synthesize, right? Those two ways of perceiving reality and understanding reality. That's my hope and my prayer anyway for humanity, you know. But yeah, I just wanted to say that about that. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. Let's pick up at 3.11. Anyone else want to read? Maybe 3.11 through 3. Actually, just go 3.11 through 3.16. And if there's no takers, I will read it.
I can read it.
Great.
Okay. Questioner, was the pyramid then built by the mutual action of many of your people? I am Ra. The pyramids, which we thought built, were constructed from thought forms created by our social memory complex. Questioner, Then the rock was created by thought in place rather than moved from somewhere else. Is that correct? I am Ra. We built with everlasting rock the Great Pyramid, as you call it. Other of the pyramids were built with stone moved from one place to another. Questioner, what is everlasting rock? I am Ra. If you can understand the concept of thought forms, you will realize that the thought form is more regular in its distortion than the energy fields created by the materials in the rock, which has been created through thought form from thought to finite energy and beingness in your, shall we say, distorted reflection of the level of the thought form. May we answer you in any more helpful way? Questioner, this is slightly trivial, but I was wondering why, in that case, the pyramid was made of many blocks rather than the whole thing being created at once. I am Ra. There's a law which we believe to be one of the more significant primal distortions of the law of one. That is the law of confusion. You have called this the law of free will. We wish to make a healing machine or time-space ratio complex, which was efficacious as possible. However, we did not desire to allow the mystery to be penetrated by the people in such a way that we became worshipped as builders of a miraculous pyramid. Thus, it appears to be made, not thought. Well, then you speak of the pyramid, especially the Great Pyramid, I assume as primarily a healing machine, and also spoke of it as a device for initiation. Are these one and the same concepts? Ra, they are part of one complex of love, light, intent sharing. To use the healing aspects properly, it was important to have a purified and dedicated channel or energizer for the love light of the infinite creator to flow through. Thus, the initiatory method was necessary to prepare the mind, the body, and the spirit for service in the creator's work. The two are integral. Questioner, does the shape of the pyramid itself, is that a key function of the initiation process? Ra, this is a large question. We feel that we shall begin and ask you to reevaluate and ask further at a later session this somewhat, shall we say, informative point. To begin, there are two main functions of the pyramid in relation to the initiatory procedures. One has to do with the body. Before the body can be initiated, the mind must be initiated. This is the point at which most adepts of your present cycle find their mind-body-spirit complexes distorted from. When the character and personality that is the true identity of the mind has been discovered, the body then must be known in each and every way. Thus, the various functions of the body need understanding and control with detachment. The first use of the pyramid, then, is the going down into the pyramid for purposes of deprivation of sensory input, so that the body may, in a sense, be dead and another life begin. We advise at this time any necessary questions and a fairly rapid ending of this session. Have you any query at this time space?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot there. What is everlasting rock?
Sounds like an album that should happen.
Well, I don't know how many of you are reading along in The Secret of Light, but you might recognize this idea that Walter Russell talks about, which is idea precedes the manifestation of idea, the form of idea. And the form of idea is not the idea. So I take this to mean everlasting rock is the idea of rock. It's the portion of the original thought, the creator, that is about rock. You know, rock is one fairly significant aspect of, you know, the creation. And there's a level at which prior to any form, prior to any rock, prior to any physical material that is rock, there is an idea of rock that's a part of the creator's idea. And I think everlasting rock might be referring to that. The blueprint of rock, the concept of rock, the idea of rock. Does that resonate?
Yeah. It sounds to me like they created it out of thin air. Like they're so in tune with the element of earth in this form of rockness, kind of like granite, whatever. They're like, boom, that it appears. Because they can.
Yeah. That is my understanding of how the Great Pyramid came into form. It was materialized overnight.
I never considered
After
that.
2,600 years of designing it in mind, though. But the actual manifestation, I think, happened fairly instantly, which is just, I can't even like, what are you talking about? That's crazy.
I never even considered that before this moment, but I think it's what happened.
In a way, the two pyramids, I don't know what they're called, the ones that are not the Great Pyramid of Giza, the other two pyramids in the three pyramid complex at Giza, or the three large pyramids. I think there's even some more smaller ones. Those are a little bit more of a mystery to me than the Great Pyramid, because okay, as profound as it sounds, we can kind of understand that Ra manifested from everlasting rock. They manifested from thought and brought it into form instantly. But then they say that they worked with the people of Egypt to construct the other ones. So how did that work? That's even more confusing to me. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Ahead,
This one's driving me nuts. They said, it'll take me too long to find it, but he had just said that he didn't want, why was it in blocks then instead of just one pyramid? If you're going to snap it into existence to begin with, there seems a little disconnect there. If they're concerned about being too godlike and didn't want to be worshipped just because they made this miraculous thing, but yet then they miraculously snapped it into existence. There's a little disconnect there. They didn't want to be worshipped, but yet they did this thing anyway. Is this forethought for the rest of us studying this thousands of years later? Like what? I don't know. Somebody else help me out there.
Yep. Yuri?
I believe they didn't gather all the people of Egypt and say, come here and we will create a pyramid right now before your eyes. So it just appeared somewhere and then they started bringing people there. That's it. So people didn't see how the pyramid appears instantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that
And
makes sense to me.
And I think that maybe the other pyramids that they were created by a third power from local stone. Maybe there were some people in Egypt who were participating in this process, but they were like doing the metal bending, but in bigger scale.
Yep.
Does that mean there were some initiates that they were already working with and said, let's go play with a rock over here and shape it with our minds? This is how you do it, kind of thing? Is that what they were doing? Teaching?
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. We don't know. They certainly don't give detailed account of how that took place, but that makes sense to me. There would have been some who were present. I appreciate what Yuri said. I think of it similarly. I think there may have been a small, much smaller population in that area at the time, and there may have been nobody around. They might have designed the working so that the first pyramid came into appearance and nobody saw it. That's possible. We don't know that for sure, but I think in response to your question, that it seems, well, it just seems so apparent to me that however they were designing the work, of manifesting the pyramid for the time that they did it, we don't really know. But in terms of how is that going now? Well, it was totally successful. If their intention was to make it so that it didn't seem like a miraculous pyramid, guess what? It worked, because nobody says, there's lots of conflicting theories about how the pyramids were working. And of course, nobody gets them right, but nobody's saying that an ET manifests it from thin air, right? Like nobody talks about that unless you read the law of one. So to some degree, it's very easy to connect with the fact that, like, yeah, in terms of the people that came after the work, they would be able to not know. They would, it preserved the law of confusion for those folks, including us, including all of humanity on Earth today. Okay, so what about the piece of the pyramid being a healing machine? And then Don asks, wait, so is it more for healing, or is it more for initiation, or are those the same thing? And then Ra gives their response. I'm curious if you all have any thoughts about that. What's the relationship there?
I think they kind of say that the initiate has to go through some sort of healing cycle before they become like a channel for intelligent infinity to be able to heal. And then later on, I think they say that someone like that's essentially like a portable king's chamber, but able to take light, separate it into the rainbow, put it back together, doing this all. But they have to go through some sort of something to be able to, maybe some sort of sacrifice or challenge.
Or death, death inside the pyramid. Ego death, right? Mind death.
Yeah, some sort of journey. What is that? Journey of the Wounded Healer. But I'm superimposing that, but
yep. Yeah, that's it. That's really important what you say about, like, yeah, they the healers have to go through their own process. Yeah, it strikes me as like it's a system. The pyramid is not just, doesn't have just a singular function. It's a whole holistic system for initiating healers, and then also providing the space for working for those healers who have been initiated to then pay it forward and initiate more healers. And it has this kind of like it's intended to have this effect where it can grow and build on the initial thing itself. So my understanding is that they were initiating crystallized healers. Ra was initiating crystallized healers. And what it means to be a crystallized healer, they get into this further. We'll read about this when we get further into the material. But it means that essentially a person has balanced and harmonized their entire energy body. So all 7 chakras have been cleared. And what is it to clear a chakra? From my understanding, it means, a blockage is where there's a part of reality, whether it's self or other self or the universe about us, that we don't accept. And when we don't accept it, that portion of the creator's light can't move through our energy system because we're blocking it. We don't accept it. We don't want it to be a part of us at some level. And I'm oversimplifying, but that's the general gist. And so a crystallized healer accepts all things, accepts everything. So when they see somebody who's not well, they see that they're not well, but they also see them as perfect. And that's kind of the paradox of the crystallized healer. They're able to, and it's also the paradox of the adept. Ra talks about, adepts see themselves as both perfect and also capable of evolution, which means there's growth to be done. So Ra is trying to prepare crystallized healers by initiating them in the pyramid. And then the pyramid itself has these qualities that allow for healing to take place at a much more profound level or supported level. But the healers, the crystallized healers are key. The pyramid itself doesn't heal. It doesn't do the healing, nor does the crystallized healer, but the crystallized healer is kind of facilitates the process or energizes the process. So it's this whole system of initiation, healing, and service that's really, really profound and deep and complex, and also unified in the pyramid itself. That's how I understand it.
And it seems appropriate that what they've designed is perfectly appropriate, they thought, for the civilization at that time. So it's working with matter and metaphysics and the current ability of the people at the time, they thought.
Right. Yeah, they just didn't anticipate that it would be captured by the royals, by the elites, who would then lock everyone else out and then use it for their own control and power. Whoopsies. Yeah, Neil.
See, then that's where the whole paradox of the sixth density unity being outside of time, and they could have potentially seen this coming of how it would have affected when the pyramids were there. And then then some other part of Ra was also talking to Don, Jim, and Carla at the same time, like in the future. So it's just can't even process of how they're outside of time. How could they have even messed up? And how does it I'm stuck there.
I'm stuck with you. I cannot plumb that mystery of how they can both be simultaneously outside of time, but also they can't predict the future. And they can't. They say this very clearly. Like Don presses them on, okay, when is harvest going to take place? And they're like, between 100 and 700 years. They don't know. They don't know when harvest is going to complete on Earth, when fourth density will be in full swing. So they can't really predict the future. They can't really see the future, even though they're outside of time. I don't understand it.
I mean, that must mean that things are just constantly changing based on like different mathematical probabilities and choices of free will that happen at the level of 1 billion 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 to the billionth power.
Yeah, it's because we have free will and we're exercising it down here with or without consciousness,
That's pretty much
Yeah,
what I
Scott.
was going to say too. Yeah. That from my understanding, there's always many possible futures at any given point in time, but there's always one probable future. So a lot of times people who can prophesize really well can see the probable future, and oftentimes it comes true, but even the probable future can change.
Well, and what comes up for me is that, okay, so if a prophet can see the likely outcome and then shares that information, then it affects the mind, of the entity, the collective entity, whatever, it's a social complex or the whole planet, which then affects the outcome. This is like classic sci-fi stuff where the paradoxes of time travel. It's like it's interesting philosophy, but and also mysterious. Anyway, it's very interesting.
But there's also a point of no return in that equation.
You want to say more about
that? So you have the many possible futures at a given point in time, given whatever the circumstances. Like my own life, I may die, pass to another certain point in time. If I'm doing something that's really unhealthy for me, right? And it's clearly like making myself sick. At a certain point in time, I can change that behavior. I can go get some healing. There's things that I can do to reverse that process or to start healing, and then my trajectory for life is different. But if I were to keep doing the same thing and not do anything about it, clearly it becomes like there's a point of no return. I hope that's a good example.
Gotcha.
I have any idea how they can travel through the time and that don't know the future. Imagine we are watching the movie and we can scroll it at any time, but we don't know how the heroes what they will do and how they will react, but we know what they have to do to finish the movie. And then if you want to go to the very beginning of the movie, you scroll to the beginning and you can scroll to the very end. But the actors live their life there.
And Kristen, when you said that, mathematical, I think you said mathematical possibilities or something. Well, and that is interesting too, because it talks about, Ross says, the possibility probability vortex. And that's a clue when they talk about, whether or not, when they talk about looking into the future, my understanding is they scan the possibility probability vortex. So they can see multiple kind of like branching possibilities, and they can view which one of those branches have the most solidity or the most seem the most probable. But because we are in a free will universe, it's still not 100% known. They can only know probabilities or possibilities. And that's another clue into this whole mystery. Okay, so back to 3.16, one of the things that caught my attention was they say, when the character and personality, that is the true identity of the mind, has been discovered, the body then must be known in each and every way. And this is foreshadowing when Don asks to be taught the process of healing and to be initiated as a healer, they go further into this. But this idea that the mind comes first in the process of initiation and in the process of becoming crystallized healer or embarking on the path of the adept, the mind is first. The mind comes before body. The mind knowing itself, us knowing the true nature and identity of the mind, is work that must be undertaken before working with healing the body. And that's interesting. When I first went through the material, it was kind of a surprise to me. It wasn't intuitive somehow.
Mind, body, spirit. I mean, also it comes always said in that order too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's the same in the order of the when you get into the archetypal mind, the mind cycle is first, 1 through 7, and then the body cycle, 8 through 14, and the final cycle is the spirit cycle. Scott, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. And I'll try to get better at remembering to put it down too. My thought was, I wonder if that's parallel to, at first there was the thought before the creation. That's what occurred to me.
Mm-hmm.
But prior to you asking that question and reading that earlier, I was like, oh, kind of also similar to that. I was like, oh, wonder why that is.
Mm-hmm.
It's also confusing too, because I feel like if someone's about to go through an initiatory process, that there's got to be some prior spiritual agreement or activity happening first before like the mind, like I would assume that would be something that either the higher self approves. I don't know.
Yeah, I think in our society that makes sense, because there aren't like, there aren't spiritual initiation schools. I mean, there are mystery schools. There are some mystery schools in our world. They're not very well known, but it's just not, it doesn't tend to be a known option to us in our day and age. It's not like, oh, I'll go through a spiritual initiation and become a crystallized healer. But it doesn't mean that that there weren't times, or there aren't contexts where that's true. So I think in our context, what you're saying, Kristen, makes sense to me. Like, there has to be some pretty deep inner calling to even sort of like get us to the place where we would make that choice and pursue that path. But I'm like, I wonder what it was like in Ra's time, when there was like beings in that civilization in Egypt, and that work was happening, and they could just be like, oh, do I want to become, a farmer, or do I want to go and get initiated in Ra's school? And, in that context, it's a little bit different. And it's kind of hard for us to imagine that.
That's such an awesome perspective. Thank you for that.
Yeah, Farrellyn.
Yeah, I want to add to that, and I'm taking my hand down. It makes me think that, I think Ross said that at a certain density, beings then graduate and then choose to be embodied. We start to be conscious of our incarnations, and we choose our parents, and I'm a proponent of that. And I was going to say that in our world, I think we choose our bodies and we choose our brain. So I want to make a distinction between the mind and the physical brain that is capable of certain things. Certain brains are not fully capable, and there can be damage, there can be blockages to initiation or self-realization. So yeah, that I believe that in our society we can choose a life that sets us up for a possibility of initiation. Like I was a seeker from waking up at 17, looking into all these paths of realization. So, and I probably picked a time where that was possible to connect with all these sources. So the story is building for all of us. But yeah, the first thought was the brain is an important component too of being able to make the mind, body, spirit holism.
Nia.
So something I've always thought is, to change something, we have to be aware of it. And that is the mind. The mind has to have the attention on something. Like later on, they talk about Carla's heart blockage, specific that she's over giving. She's spreading herself too thin, and that's becoming a physical ailment and a blockage in her green ray, in her heart space. So, these the ability to have the mind aware of something, how that translates for us would be things like, let's say, childhood wounding. I notice a pattern. I'm wanting to learn, I'm wanting to grow, I notice a pattern, and maybe it's a blockage in one of my lower chakras. I have a distortion of the first, second, or third ray, and that affects how I've proceeded through my life. But then I become aware of it via the mind. And then then we can work with the body, which then works with the spirit / energy body / soul. Then at the final end of that is soul's growth. So that allows rewiring in the body and the physical brain once the mind consciousness becomes aware of it. So we get mind consciousness awareness, then we notice the physical energetic blockage then we work towards that, and that translates to spirit growth or soul's growth. And circling back around to what Fairland said, that yeah, I do believe part of some of these catalysts we choose to set up in front of us, no matter how difficult they are to go through them, that we do choose a significant amount of catalysts to know that that is purposeful for soul's growth. And this, to me, gets back into a larger concept of, I've remembered, believe it or not, I've actual memory of some of my past lives, and come out of these visioning sessions or whatnot and gone, oh my God, that's why I came into this world this way, because I've picked apart how I was raised, the parents I chose, the society I've lived in, and I'm like, nothing I've experienced in this life makes sense for the level of whatever I just showed up with. I have these stories, and my mom's like, you came into this world that way. And I'm like, okay, that still doesn't answer why I'm dealing with that as part of my personality and just what I came here with. So to me, it's even farther back to continuation of soul's growth, and why, again, we have certain catalysts that we become aware of in the mind than the body's spirit complex.
Yeah, I like that.
Yep, me too. That's a really major point and question, and a whole discussion about the significance of bringing things in, like, when we're working with our energy bodies, how important is it to be conscious of what we're trying to unblock? That's a whole, there's differing opinions about this, and I'm very fascinated about that question. And we are out of time for now, so we'll have to table that. But I appreciate that perspective, Nia. Thank you for sharing it. If y'all don't mind, I would just like to read these final two questions, and then we'll close out. 13.7 questioner. The only question is there anything that we have done wrong, or anything that we could do to make the instrument more comfortable? Ra, we scan this instrument. This instrument has been much aided by these precautions. We suggest only some attention to the neck, which seems in this body distortion to be distorted in the area of strength weakness. More support, therefore, to the neck area may be an aid. Questioner, should we have her drink the water from the chalice behind her head after we charge it, or should we use a different glass of water? Ra, that and only that chalice shall be the most beneficial, as the virgin material living in the chalice accepts, retains, and responds to the love vibration activated by your beingness. I am Ra. I will now leave this group, rejoicing in the power and peace of the one infinite creator, Adonai. All right, we did it. We made it all the way through. Thank you all so much for being here and bringing your beautiful minds and hearts to this group study.
Excellent.
Appreciate y'all very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you,
y'all.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Until next time.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste.